Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, eminent pulmonologists and other physicians who have joined us from India and abroad. I welcome you all on behalf of Chest Council of India. I am Atri Gangopadhyay, the East Zone Governor. I am based at Ranchi, Jharkhand. I want to thank AstraZeneca who have partnered with us for this beautiful webinar. We are talking about two beautiful topics, GINA Update 2021 and vaccines in COVID. So, this is a photo or a painting taken from the Great Flood or Mahapralay as we used to call it. So basically the concept is that when there is a flood and the flood goes down, always something pure or something beautiful emerges. So basically, if you look at the treatment of asthma in current day, we are all flooded with evidence. And GINA has this difficult task of sifting from the evidence to bring out those beautiful material with which we do our practice of asthma patients today. So sifting the relevant extract and converting it to a guideline or an update. This photograph, we all know it as evolution. We know how human beings evolved. Similarly, the understanding of asthma, the diagnostics of asthma, the treatment for asthma has also been evolving. The disease is not evolving, but our understanding and hence the approach to treatment is evolving. There are certain concepts known as phenotyping, targeted therapy, non-pharmacological therapy. So the GINA guidelines, the first report was published in 1995. They try to collect all current evidence and present it as concise as possible as a ready-to-use manual for every health practitioner worldwide who are treating asthma. Now, what is the challenge in recent times? Something known as a lockdown. Earlier, 2 years ago, anyone could travel anywhere, anyone could meet anyone. But all of a sudden, this got stopped due to something unfortunate. So the biggest challenge was how could these scientists come together, sift through the evidence, newly generated evidence, and come to this new update. So this was a very big challenge. About the speaker, he is none other than Dr. Rajadhar. Dr. Rajadhar is one of the most acclaimed pulmonary practitioners in Eastern India and one of the most acclaimed medical speakers in India. After spending a few years in the United Kingdom, he returned to Kolkata, India, and is currently attached to CMRI Hospital, Kolkata, where he has a complete department of pulmonology with all advances possible in India. He started the first DNB training program in pulmonary medicine outside a government or plant hospital in Eastern India. Now, as we told, we are talking about two topics today. The second topic is something which we all consider as magic bullets, vaccine. And what vaccine? COVID vaccine. This is a photograph of the world map, 1988. The red areas were the countries which were suffering from polio. The white areas were countries which had eliminated polio. 2014, look at how much this red area has diminished. Only to 1 point over here, 2 points over here. So this is what vaccine can actually do to a disease. The vaccine can work as magic bullets and a worldwide disease can be minimized to this much. Now, this gentleman is Dr. Edward Jenner, was Dr. Edward Jenner. He was a pioneer in a certain deadly disease known as smallpox. And this gentleman was Dr. Louis Pasteur, and his understanding of microbiology and immunology forms the cornerstone of vaccine research even today. And there is an institute named after him, Pasteur Institute, which has the same thing. So basically, these two gentlemen were considered fathers of this vaccines, Edward Jenner and Louis Pasteur. What is the current challenge when we are talking about COVID and COVID vaccine? Initial vaccines, if you look at their history, it has taken around 100 years. But the current challenge is to develop a vaccine in less than a year. And every technology that was perhaps used in vaccine creation was tried. Every possible mechanism of immunity was explored. They tried to understand the proteins of the virus. They tried to understand the proteins in the body responsible to act with the virus. They tried to understand the various receptor mechanisms and what not. When we look at this date to remember, many sweet memories can come to our mind. But if you are a doctor practicing in India, in recent times, the date to remember is 16 January 2021, when finally the world's largest vaccination program was kick-started, and first with the healthcare workers. So this is a date to remember for all maybe pulmonologists or doctors practicing in India in current time. Future scenario, adverse effects, we don't know. Efficacy, maybe better vaccines in the pipeline. And of course, there are always certain opposition people, the anti-vaxxers. The speaker, he is Dr. Ravi Doshi. Dr. Ravi Doshi is based at Indore, Times Hospital and Mohak Hospital. He is the current National Secretary of Chest Council of India. He is the first person to successfully organize a CCI regional meet at Indore in 2019. And in recent times, he became a household name in Madhya Pradesh and nearby during COVID attack. And he was a shining beacon even for other physicians. So without ado, I would pass on the dais to the two speakers now, and I would request them to move forward. First, we have the talk by Dr. Raja, and then we shall have the talk by Dr. Ravi Doshi.
Hello friends, my name is Dr. Rajadhar, and I'm here today to speak to you about the recent changes that have happened in China. I'm not going to focus just on 2021 as this title suggests. I'll talk about more of a continuum of change that's happened since 2019 till date, and hopefully you will get some clinical pointers as to how these changes are relevant to your clinical practice. So this is slides borrowed from the 2020 and the 2021 slide decks that have been provided by Gina. Hence, these slides are freely available online. They are meant for educational purposes. Hence, feel free to go and visit the website and use these slides for your own education and for others. So the first bit that 2020 focused on, and there's greater detail in 2021, is looking at COVID-19 and asthma. This is important even today as we come to the tail end of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, we think there'll be more waves coming in, and hence this information will need to be modified further and is very pertinent for us clinicians. The gist of what Gina says about COVID and asthma is that it's important that asthmatics continue to take their prescribed asthma medications, especially the inhaled corticosteroids. The use of oral corticosteroids should be restricted only during exacerbations. However, the fear of worsening COVID-19 should not impact on the management of an asthma exacerbation. Hence, if an oral corticosteroid course is needed, it should be given without fears of increasing the chances of COVID-19 infection. If you stop inhaled corticosteroid, the risk of asthma flaring up, and hence the chances of concomitant COVID-19 infection goes up. Hence, it's important to continue the inhaled corticosteroid in patients with asthma. We've got further information now from the STOIC and the principal study that use of inhaled corticosteroids might actually be protective against asthma. Not protective against asthma, but protective against COVID-19. We also realize that use of inhaled corticosteroid might reduce the duration and the severity of COVID-19. Hence, more the rationale to use inhaled corticosteroids in patients with asthma. If the patient is on biologic therapy, please continue the biological therapy. Do not suddenly stop oral corticosteroids if they are prescribed. However, if you are in the middle of a pandemic, if there's a large surge of cases, you would hesitate to start someone on biologic therapy in asthma unless there's no other options left with you. Even more important during the COVID-19 pandemic, to make sure that patients with asthma have an action plan. In this action plan, like in any other action plan you would use in the non-COVID periods, increasing the controller and reliever medication when asthma worsens is important. Writing down a short course of oral steroids at moderate doses is important. It's important to identify the red flag symptoms and signs and seek medical help. And it's also important that treatment options, other treatment options in asthma action plans be discussed and decided on depending on the geographical location where you are there. Nebulizers are aerosol generating procedures. Hence, use of nebulizers during the pandemic increases the risk of disseminating the virus, and other patients, other individuals, healthcare workers would be at a greater risk of getting infected with COVID-19 if nebulizers are used, especially in the hospital environment. Hence, even during an exacerbation, pressured metered dose inhalers via a spacer become preferred treatment. This is something that's been studied in the past, and we have data to show that nebulized devices work as well as an MDI with a spacer, as long as the technique of MDI with spacer is correct. Spirometry again is an aerosol generating procedure. It can disseminate viral particles, and hence it can expose the staff and other individuals and patients to the risk of infection. Hence, when community transmission of the virus is happening, as is happening in India just now, as is happening in Bengal, which is where I am from, postpone spirometry and peak flow measurements within the healthcare facility unless there's an absolute requirement to do it. And following contact and droplet precautions in case you need to do it, whatever the urgency, please make sure that droplet precautions are adopted. The distancing that's advocated is done. The masking that's advocated is done. The hand sanitization is done as per protocol. Follow strict infection control procedures. So nebulization, oxygen therapy, sputum induction, manual ventilation, NIV and intubation. All of these generate aerosol particles, and hence adequate precautions should be taken by healthcare workers when any of these procedures are done. And then follow your hospital protocol, the local state protocol for hygiene strategies and personal protective equipment. This will be different even in different parts of the country and obviously globally. We next come to the next part, which is probably the most important part of my talk today, which is what's changed from 2019 till 2021. And I quote this line verbatim. I want you to look at the bottom of that slide. And the guideline said that GINA no longer recommends treating adults or adolescents with asthma with the short-acting beta agonists alone. So the rescue inhaler, the blue inhaler that we are so used to, no longer remains the preferred option as rescue medication in asthma. Instead, they should receive symptom-driven in mild asthma or daily corticosteroid-containing inhaler to reduce the risk of severe exacerbations. So this is the sea change. And I want you to hold on for a minute and think of this. So all these years we have learned that a salbutamol or a levosalbutamol inhaler is the rescue inhaler people carry in their pocket. Now look at the change. Any inhalation that you take, even as rescue, needs to contain an inhaled corticosteroid. And the aim of doing this is to prevent airway remodeling, is to prevent airway inflammation, and hence control or reduce the progression of asthma. Let's see what this means when you look at the actual step up and step down charts which have been made popular by GINA. So in step 1, you can see that it is as needed low dose ICS plus formoterol. And then as an option, you have low dose ICS taken whenever a SABA is taken. So it's an ICS plus a LABA as first option. And then if you have an option of a SABA plus an ICS, you could do that too. The preferred reliever, so that's your controller. The preferred reliever becomes as and when needed ICS formoterol. And the other reliever option is the traditional rescue inhaler, which is the short-acting beta agonist. So that's step 1. Preferred controller, low-dose ICS formoterol. It could be as and when, or it could be maintenance. Preferred reliever again is ICS formoterol as needed, or second option, the poorer option, is as and when needed SABA. I'll show you in a minute how things have changed from this 2020 guidance to the 21 guidance. Step 2 is low-dose ICS, which is a maintenance dose of the inhaler, or as and when needed low-dose ICS for formoterol. The other controller option is again the traditional Montelukast in our country, so the leukotriene receptor antagonist, or a low-dose ICS taken whenever a SABA is taken. While this seems a feasible option for step 1, I guess this would be the poorer cousin for step 2. Reliever again remains as and when needed low-dose ICS for plus formoterol. Thereon, the guidelines remain similar. So step 3 and step 4 is low-dose ICS plus LABA. Then you increase the dose, and you've got options of hiking the dose of the inhaled corticosteroid, add on tiotropium, add on leukotriene receptor antagonist, etc. Hence, it's step 1 and step 2, like I'm pointing out from the cursor, when the thinking has changed, things seem to have changed significantly. So when you get an asthma patient for the first time, GINA asks, should you always start at step 1? And that's not the case. A lot of patients will come to you later in the course of the disease. They might come to you referred from other physicians. Hence, rather than just putting a step number, it might be important to put in presenting symptoms, which is why in 2020, GINA put in this box, which I personally find useful, which is why I'm putting it up. So for all patients, if there are infrequent asthma symptoms, and if these happen less than once a month, the preferred treatment would be as and when required low-dose ICS plus formoterol. Other options are ICS whenever a SABA is taken, or in combination or as separate inhalers. The next presenting symptom is asthma symptoms or the need for reliever twice a month or more than that. So you increase severity based on symptoms. And here again, it's low-dose ICS with as needed SABA or as needed low-dose ICS plus formoterol. And then the severity increases. So you're going up steps. You're probably going now to GINA 3 and GINA 4. Troublesome asthma symptoms most days, waking up due to asthma, especially if any risk factors exist. And here you're going to, from starting off with low-dose ICS plus LABA, or you're going for ICS formoterol as reliever therapy maintenance, or you're going up on the dose of ICS, making it medium dose, and so on. So those are the symptom-driven initiation of the drugs that we spoke about, that GINA has depicted in step up and step down management. Before starting initial controller treatment, there's a few things that need to be remembered. You have to record the evidence for the diagnosis of asthma. Record the patient's level of symptom control. If you don't write down the symptom control, you're never going to know whether the symptoms are getting better or worse. Initial asthma presentation, record the patient's level of symptom control and risk factors, the triggers for their asthma. Consider factors influencing the choice between available treatment options. Ensure that the patient can use the inhaler the way you want them to use it. and schedule an appointment for a follow-up visit. After starting the initial controller treatment, review the patient's response, see whether the recommendations for ongoing treatment and other key management issues are being followed. And then if the patient has maintained good level of control for 3 months, you can think of stepping down on treatment. So this is the initial controller medication that we spoke about. This is from 2020. We've talked about this. The symptoms are chalked in when you compare it with the previous step up ladder that I showed you. So step 1 is symptoms less than twice a month. Step 2 is symptoms twice a month or more. Step 3 is symptoms most days or waking with asthma. Step 4 is symptoms most days, waking with asthma once a week or more, and low lung function. So that's how correlate the symptoms and the steps between 1 and 4. Step 5, and we won't discuss this in today's meeting because it's outside the ambit of the talk and neither do we have time for it. It's high-dose ICS/LABA, and then phenotyping, and then biologics are the treatments of choice. But that's a discussion which is best left for another day. So this is initial controller treatment in adults and adolescents. So again, it talks about symptoms on the left and starting with drugs on the right. And I want you to focus that we seem to have come to a combination, the formoterol budesonide combination, which is used across the different steps, across different grades of symptoms, and both as reliever and as maintenance therapy. And that's a new idea, a new way of thinking. This is from 2021. And I put this slide up. It's remarkably similar to the 2020 guidance. But the reason I put this up is because this is actually graded reliever medication into preferred reliever and alternative reliever. And you can see that the grade of recommendation, the strength of recommendation for low-dose ICS plus formoterol has grown even stronger since the 2020 guidance. The take ICS whenever SABA is taken guideline or recommendation has gone one step beneath. It's been taken up out from the main step-up treatment regime and it's gone downwards. So more strength to the ICS formoterol combination, both as reliever and maintenance treatment. In case of adolescents with the diagnosis of asthma, so this is the 11 to 18-year age group, you can see things are not different. And again, controller and preferred reliever using ICS formoterol as reliever reduces the risk of exacerbation compared with the SABA only inhaler. And again, here you see as needed low-dose ICS formoterol is the treatment of choice. And then as second line, you have take ICS whenever a SABA is taken. And the rest of the guideline flow is the same as what we described a little while ago. One of the questions when you take ICS formoterol, i.e. formoterol budesonide on an SOS basis is there a chance of overdosing? So GINA tells you that the maximum recommended total dose in one day is 72 micrograms of formoterol. So that's 12 inhalations of formoterol in the formoterol budesonide turbohaler, which contains 6 micrograms of formoterol. So important to remember this, so I'll repeat it, 72 micrograms of formoterol max, which means 12 inhalations of the 6 microgram inhaler that's present. What about formoterol beclomethasone? So this is an option. The evidence is less with this. However, this again can be prescribed as maintenance and reliever, and the maximum recommended dose here for formoterol is 48 microgram, which is 6 inhalation of the beclomethasone formoterol PMDI. So an option is beclomethasone and formoterol. What about asthma, assessment of asthma control? The higher the SABA use, the worse the outcome. So it's not just that formoterol budesonide reduces airway remodeling. We now know that SABA used indiscriminately on a regular basis results in worse outcome by increasing the number of exacerbations in these individuals. Hence, ICS formoterol is better from an efficacy point of view. Using salbutamol by itself on multiple occasions for symptom control is to the patient's detriment. So we are talking about a double whammy here. What are low dose, medium dose, and high dose ICS? So this is a chart again Gina put in 2020, and it looks at what is low dose for children 5 years and younger. And I want you to look at this chart in your own time. It's not a table of equivalence, but it's a dosing that's important. If you treat children, it tells you what is low, what's medium, and what's high for children. The other important facet I wanted to bring out quickly before I finish is the adverse effect with Montelukast that's been pointed out. So FDA issued a black box warning for Montelukast in 2020. It said that the black box warning was because there was suicidality in adults and adolescents, nightmares and behavioral problem in children. Hence, before prescribing Montelukast, there should be a balancing of the risks and benefits there are with this drug. And hence the boxed warning that you see in the bottom, which is an FDA warning that is issued with Montelukast. However, my precautionary note, this does not mean Montelukast is a useless drug. In patients with allergic rhinitis and asthma, it's an effective drug. However, it tells us clinicians that Montelukast should not be used willy-nilly. It should not be continued for months and years together. Use it while it's effective and then stop it. Give the patient a drug holiday, a Montelukast holiday, and then restart when the symptoms reappear again. In 2020, Gina alluded to acute asthma and high flow oxygen. So this is something which was added in. This is in line with the use of HFNO or high flow nasal oxygen that we talk about. It talked about the role of trained lay health workers in asthma education. It spoke about factors contributing to the development and poor control of asthma. So it talked about obesity, and it talked about traffic related air pollution. So that's me done. I hope there were some clinical points that you would remember from this talk. However, one carry home message I want to reiterate again: when you prescribe inhalers to your patient, irrespective of whether it's as a reliever or a maintenance inhaler, make sure that the patient gets a puff of ICS whenever they take an inhaler. If you do that, you will prevent disease progression, you will prevent airway remodeling, and you will reduce the incidence of exacerbations in your patients with asthma. Thank you very much for listening. I'm grateful to and honored for having had a chance to speak at this webinar. Hopefully you'll have some questions for me at the end.
We can start, sir.
A very good evening to all my respected colleagues and seniors and dear juniors. I would like to extend a warm thanks, first of all, to Chest Council of India, Krishna sir, and a big thanks to Astra for organizing today's meet, where I can talk about one of the most relevant and happy topics about COVID-19, a topic which tells all that humanity and its scientific achievements can give back to humanity as a boon. I am here to talk about vaccines for COVID-19. My presentation will be having an overview of the current global situation of COVID-19, a short expression about vaccines, vaccine development, which are the various available vaccines for COVID-19, and what is the several post-approval pharmacovigilance going on. Well, as you know, the current global situation of COVID-19 is showing a upward and downward trend in several parts of the world. If you can see in India, the cases are falling very rapidly, and in Southeast Asia, over the past few months, we have seen a remarkable fall in the number of deaths and also in the number of active cases. But as all of us must be observing on a day-to-day basis, these data are very fluctuating, and although from what I can say about my own district is 10 to 12 weeks ago, we were having somewhere around 900 cases. But 4 weeks ago, it came down to somewhere around 300, 400 cases, and now we are at almost below 100 cases. And that is because the administration has made our district, Indore, as one of the number one sites for vaccination in throughout India. That is why we are seeing a very good improvement in the overall COVID-19 situation. Now, the cases reported all over the world in the last 7 days have significantly come down. And in India, we can say that the cases reported are around 10 to 50 per 100,000 population, which is significantly less than what we saw over the past few months or years. And it is still very significantly less as compared to a lot of places which are yet to begin their vaccination drive, like Brazil, Argentina in the South American. But we can also note that it is significantly more than several countries like China, the better part of Africa, Australia, which have already achieved a very good and high vaccination rate. Therefore, all the more important to have all of us vaccinated. Now, this particular second strain has brought in a lot of information of a different types of variants of SARS-CoV-2. The SARS-CoV-2 variants of concern are namely the alpha, the B.1.7, which was the UK strain, the beta, also the South Africa strain, gamma, the Brazil strain, and the Delta strain, which was isolated from Andhra Pradesh in India, and it is also known to be a major cause of the second wave and is known to be very highly virulent, very highly infectious. Now, why do we need vaccines at all? Well, we need vaccines against infectious diseases. They are used as the most effective, not only efficiency wise, technology wise, but even cost wise, in terms of deaths prevented. They limit the spread of the pathogen and they indirectly protect people who cannot be vaccinated by providing a herd immunity. Now, how do the vaccines work? Well, vaccines train the immune system to recognize the pathogen before they make you ill. They shorten the time taken by the immune system to fully get activated, thereby gaining precious time, like we heard in the 10th seminar on cytokine storm. Once a lot of time is spent in activating the immunity, already a chance of cytokine storm comes in diseases like COVID-19, which can be potentially lethal. So the key ingredient in the vaccine is the antigen. What can be the antigen? It is either a tiny part of the disease causing organism or a weakened non-dangerous version of the virus. So while the body's immune system learns how to fight or finds a specific way to fight, it will do so without getting infected from the vaccine causing the vaccine containing virus itself. Now, once you are vaccinated, an immune reaction develops. This leads to immune memory, which is the target and which is the most important source that we want to develop from the vaccination. This immune memory in future will give rapid response to any new infection, which happens after this particular vaccination. But what is the vaccine? What is the immune reaction? Well, it causes, it depends on what type of vaccine you're using. If you're using a already inactivated vaccine or a protein containing vaccine, then it is presented to the antigen presenting cell, the virus. This antigen presenting cell in turn goes and activates the helper T cells. These helper T cells activate the killer T cells, leading to destruction of the infected cells and activation of memory T cells. These helper T cells in turn form a memory bank of their own. And these helper T cells are also known to activate B cells, which release antibodies against coronavirus, which help in destruction of the coronavirus. And they in turn also contribute to the memory bank of the immunity in the form of memory B cells. So ultimately, the whole process of vaccination and vaccination induced immunity is the formation of these memory T cells and B cells in the body. Now, how are these vaccines or how are these antigens delivered and the antibodies delivered? There are different routes that can be intramuscular, intradermal, oral, intranasal, subcutaneous. The dosing, it can be once, like the Johnson vaccine, twice, like most the Covishield, Oxford vaccine, Pfizer, or it can be even 3 times. Now, what are the common immunogens which are used to develop viral vaccines? Inactivated viruses are used, for example, it is used in the Sinovac Chinese vaccine, in which heat or chemicals render the virus harmless, so it cannot affect human cells anymore. The immune system will still recognize the virus and fight it and develop immunity. Then there is a weakened virus, in which there is alteration of the genetic code of the virus, making it almost harmless. It is still infectious, but very inefficiently. The immune system can easily fight it and develop immunity. Then you have the situation where you use several other viral carriers, which are commonly the measles or the adenovirus. The measles has been used in the Merck vaccine, which is still under phase 1, and the adenovirus carrier, which has been used in our Covishield, the Oxford vaccine, Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, or it has been used by the Sputnik, which carries two types of adenoviruses. So the scientists can engineer other viruses to carry the SARS-CoV-2 spike gene in their genome. The carrier will infect cells and force it to express the spike protein, prompting an immune response. Because as you know, spike protein is the protein from which the cell will, the virus will bind to the ACE2 receptor of the cell. Now, what are the other immunogens which are available? DNA. The spike gene is inserted into human cells, forcing its expression and recognition by the immune system. You have the encapsulated RNA, which is a lipid membrane containing the DNA or RNA, making it easier to enter the cell for a similar result. Then you have proteins directly. Proteins like spike can be directly used as vaccines. Adjuvants or immune stimulating molecules will help to generate an immune reaction. Virus-like particles like spike proteins which can coat a lipid membrane mimicking an empty virus. These will produce a strong immune response, but they are technically very demanding and very hard to manufacture. It has been used in the Novax vaccine. The protein has been used in again another Chinese vaccine. The encapsulated RNA is in the famous Moderna vaccine, and the DNA vaccine is the Inovio vaccine. Well, coming to the pros and cons of various vaccine platforms, all of these are different technologies, all aimed just to give a good vaccine stimulated immune response so that there can be a development of a good memory bank, good number of memory B cells, memory T cells. Talking about the most commonly used vaccine in India, which was the first to be established, which is the viral vector based Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, commonly available to us by the trade name Covishield, which is manufactured by the Serum Institute of India based at Pune. The viral vector vaccine is also the platform used by Sputnik 5 and also was the basis of the Ebola virus. It is a well-established technology. It elicits a strong immune response in both B cells and T cells. But the limitations are that it is a little complicated to manufacture, and a previous exposure to the vector could reduce the effectiveness of the vaccine. Then comes the nucleic acid RNA, mRNA, or DNA vaccine. The good thing is there are no live components, so there is no risk of vaccine triggering the disease. It is easy to manufacture. It requires ultra cold storage, which is a bit of a dampening thing for very wide and big countries like India. The nucleic acid vaccine is a relatively newer vaccine platform technology which has never been licensed in humans, so there can be some side effects which we are yet to understand. Effective delivery into the body is required, and booster shots may be required. These 2-3 factors make nucleic acid vaccines a bit problematic in a huge population based country like India. Now, protein-based vaccines, which are commonly available, are the hepatitis B, the meningococcal, pneumococcal, and shingles. As far as COVID is concerned, you have the Novavax, which uses the protein-based vaccines. It is a well-established technology, and it is very suitable for people with a compromised immune system. There are no live components in the protein-based vaccine. That is good. It is relatively stable and therefore can be kept for a longer period of time. It is a good shelf life, but problem again, a little complicated, complex to manufacture. It may be poorly immunogenic. Adjuvants and booster shots may be required, and determining the best antigen combination at times takes time. But in this era where we want to vaccinate everybody, it is a bit too time consuming and therefore not very suitable for a huge country base with a population, very large population base like India. Some other vaccine platforms which are available are the inactivated virus vaccine, which has been used in hepatitis A, polio, and rabies. And as far as the COVID-19 is concerned, it is the vaccine platform for the very indigenous Bharat Biotech Covaxin, which has been manufactured by Bharat Biotech Hyderabad, and also Chinese vaccines like Sinovac and Sinopharm. Again, it is a well-established technology eliciting a very strong immune response. It is relatively simple to manufacture and suitable for people with compromised immune system. As there are no live viral components, it is relatively stable. But the problem is inactivated viral vaccines require a relatively large quantity of virus to be inoculated into the subject for eliciting immunity, and booster shots may definitely be required. Last but not the least is the live attenuated vaccine, which has been age old since the time of Louis Pasteur, who used it for BCG, MMR, chickenpox, smallpox, and yellow fever. As far as COVID is concerned, it has been used in Covivac. Again, a well established technology eliciting a very strong immune response, very simple to manufacture, but since it is live, it is unsuitable for people with a compromised immune system. Rare cases may trigger the disease itself. It is temperature sensitive, and hence careful storage is necessary, and we need a very strong cold chain. Now, the stages of vaccine development are very many, and they are phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Virus analysis, where the scientists sit, they study the vaccine genome. Then a vaccine is developed as to which component should go into the vaccine or not. Followed by that is the phase 1 and phase 2, where there is the animal trials focus on effectiveness and tolerance. The human trials, the phase 1, 2, 3, 4, where it is tested over volunteers over different stages. Then comes the approval or the go ahead for the vaccine, and then the mass production. Why am I talking about this? Because factually, vaccine development has changed its entire face for this particular COVID 19 epidemic. COVID 19 vaccine saw an accelerated development whereby this whole traditional vaccine development from year 0 to year 8, it took 8 years, has just been cut down into 1 year, where the preclinical in animals, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 in humans has been started, expedited, and emergency approval to use of various vaccines has been given. The lot of infrastructure has been provided. There is Gavi, there is COVAX platform provided by the WHO, in which there is a worldwide collaboration to provide vaccines to not only the developed but even the underdeveloped countries who do not have a vaccine platform for their own but contribute to a huge human population base. Now, what are the various vaccines for COVID-19 which are available? Well, if you put a count on it, total there are 287. For your luck, I'll be talking about 4 or 5 only. So don't get worried. 185 are in preclinical stage, and 102, yes, 102 have already reached into a stage of clinical development. So while we might be hearing a lot of rant about no vaccines available, I am sure in another couple of months it will be a lot of vaccines available. So most commonly used vaccines platforms are protein subunit, followed by viral vector, followed by DNA, followed by inactivated virus, followed by RNA. Now, the number of doses and schedules most commonly are the two doses, one in which it is given at day 0 and day 21, or day 0 and day 21, 28. That means at the end of 3 weeks and at the end of 4 weeks. There are some 3-dose vaccines also coming up, which are to be given at day 0, the week 4, and then week 8. Now, coming to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which has been marketed in India by the trade name of Covishield, is a WHO approved vaccine. It is a viral vector vaccine utilizing the chimpanzee adenovirus OX1, whereby it enters into the human cell by being injected in a subcutaneous or intramuscular route, whether right or left hand, that is not been specified. Following by that, it transcripts into the DNA, translates the mRNA, and expresses the spike protein, which in turn elicits the immune response. Beautiful thing is very efficacious for severe cases, and it has a good efficacy of 76% versus symptomatic cases and 85% for more than 65 years. The dosing is 2 doses, 12 weeks apart, given intramuscularly. Storage can be at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade for 6 months. The regulatory approval was obtained by the European Union, following which it is being used and is one of the most widely used vaccines used in over 130 countries. But there are a few limitations to the use of the Oxford vaccine. They have showed that they are reviewing cases of post-vaccination Guillain-Barré syndrome. At the same time, there is also an inhaled version of the vaccine which is coming up. And one very good news is in phase 2 of the vaccine is started in UK, whereby they are trying the Oxford vaccine in children as young as 6 to 17 years. Looking at the shortage of vaccines, the Oxford vaccine is also being combined with the Sputnik 5 for several countries. So there is a different combination of vaccines being tried, but Oxford vaccine at this point of time stands out to be the largest used COVID vaccine throughout the world. It reduces hospitalization by 94% between 28 to 34 days after the first dose. And it is effective against variants B117 and B1351. In a recently conducted trial, which is still preprint, they say that Covishield gives around 86% of neutralizing antibody formation versus 72% by its nearest competitor, Covaxin. Then comes another very commonly heard about vaccine, which is the biotech Pfizer, which is again a WHO approved vaccine. It works on the encapsulated mRNA vaccine platform, whereby it enters the human cell, translates the protein, and expresses the spike protein. It is an excellent efficacy of around 100% and 95%. Again, there are 2 doses, 21 days apart, given intramuscularly. But the problem is, if you want to store it, you need a very cold storage. The WHO regulatory authority gave approval for the biotech Pfizer vaccine for 16 years and above, but it has also been used in several countries like Australia, the European Union, whereby they give it for 12 to 15 years. But there is a problem. The problem is it is associated with a side effect, which is thrombosis in thrombocytopenia syndrome, and it has been noted that's why it has been banned in a few countries. In US and Singapore, the emergency use of this vaccine has been expanded to 12 to 15 years. And in US, they're even planning to expand the use of the Pfizer vaccine in 2 to 11 years. Now, there are several other proposed advantages which are proposed for several proposed modifications of use of the vaccine. Like they are testing a booster dose for the patients who are in a very high risk group. It is also being used for as a trial for highly allergic group to live attenuated vaccine, and a third shot with the 20 pneumococcal conjugate vaccine is also being considered for the Pfizer vaccine. It is almost the vaccine of choice in healthcare workers, asymptomatic transmission cases, pregnants, elderly, adolescents, and it works against a lot of variants like B117, B1351, B1617, B1526, B1429, which I would say is alpha, beta, gamma, delta, sigma, everything. That is why it is considered to be one of the best vaccines against COVID-19 with almost a 95 to 100% efficacy rate. Well, then comes the Moderna vaccine, which is an encapsulated mRNA vaccine. Again, WHO approved. The vaccine, when it's injected, the mRNA translates the spike protein straight away. It is an efficacy of 94 to 100%. 2 doses, 28 days apart, are given intramuscularly, and it can be stored at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade for 30 days. Well, again, there was a controversy regarding its usage. The Canadians saw a 4-month interval between the doses due to limited availability. Thereby, they banned it for some time. Then EU also banned it for some time because of some unusual blood clotting phenomena. In US, approval for modern vaccine is only for more than 18 years of age. The efficacy after the first dose is 80%, and the efficacy after the second dose is 90%. It is really useful in previous COVID infection in healthcare workers and pregnancy, and is effective against B1351, B16171, and California variants of the disease. Then comes the vaccine for the mass Janssen Biotech J&J Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a viral vector vaccine. The vector is adenovirus 26, which injects the DNA, which transcripts the mRNA, which translates into several spike protein and elicits the immune response. The efficacy is 92 to 74%, but the best part, which is an epidemiologist's dream, is that it is a single dose intramuscular vaccine. Well, more than 26 countries have given it an emergency approval, like Australia and New Zealand are also giving it an approval. The trial has been studied in adolescents also, and it is about to get an approval in them once it is through phase 3, phase 4. But there is again some modification in the use of J&J, like people can receive booster doses of Moderna after shots of Janssen. Still, it is pending approval in India, where it will have a huge regulatory appeal because the government will find it very easy to singly vaccinate people rather than providing double vaccination. Well, then comes the CoronaVac or Sinovac. It is an inactivated virus vaccine which is approved by the WHO. It was the first vaccine to have been started being used against COVID. It was developed by the Chinese. The efficacy is 100% for severe cases and 51% for symptomatic cases. It has two doses which are 14 to 28 days apart, given intramuscularly. And again, it has been used throughout the world, primarily in UK, South Africa, and Brazil, because it is also very good and very highly effective against these particular variants. Then comes another inactivated vaccines, which is a 78% efficacy, but two doses are required. It is the Chinese Sinopharm vaccine, which is giving almost a 78% efficacy. Then is the third vaccine, which has been launched recently in India, which is the Sputnik 5 or the Gamaleya Gam COVID vaccine. It is a viral vector vaccine. What is unique in it is it uses a different vector for every dose. It uses adenovirus 26 for the first dose and adenovirus 5 for the second dose, which thereby transcripts it delivers the DNA to the cell, which transcripts the mRNA and translates into the protein. The efficacy is 100% for severe cases, 92% for confirmed cases. It is given in two doses, 21 days apart. Uh, Sputnik 5 vaccine in India is really a vaccine which is very highly talked about. Most of my patients come to me and ask कि we want to go for vaccination, पर अभी रुकें क्या, एक बार Sputnik आ जाती है फिर लगाते हैं. But the most practical suggestion which I feel we should be given all of our patients at this point of time is to go in for a vaccination early. The sense is in getting vaccinated when the epidemic is at large. Other vaccines which are available are the CanSino Bio vaccine, which is again an adenovirus based viral vaccine, and it has the efficacy of 90% in severe and 65% in symptomatic cases. Then is a very new technology based vaccine, the Novavax vaccine, which is nanoparticle vaccine, protein based technology or vaccine platform, in which the nanoparticles coated with spike proteins are already present in the vaccine, and they elicit a very strong immune response. It gives almost a 96% efficacy to the original COVID strain, 85% to the UK strain, and 49% to the South African strain. But again, two dosing, 21 days apart, and still it is too early to comment. Why? Because it is only phase 1, phase 2 trials that are mostly going on as of now. Then you have the very famous Desi Bharat Biotech Covaxin, which is an inactivated virus vaccine. It again has an excellent efficacy of 100% versus severe cases and 70% cases overall. Then you have the mRNA based vaccine, which is the CureVac. It is still under regulation under the Herald trial, which is going on in Germany. It is submitted for approval, but yet not approved for use throughout the world. Then you have the other vaccine platforms like the Abdala vaccine, which is a protein subunit vaccine, and you have the Zydus, which is going to come out with a 3-dose vaccine, which is given by intradermal route, but again, efficacy is not yet known. It is a plasmid DNA vaccine which targets viral entry membrane protein. The best part is, due to a very short and accelerated development process, COVID-19 will be boasting of being the disease which has maximum number of vaccines which have been permitted and developed against it. There are some other vaccines like the Clover biopharmaceutical protein subunit vaccine or the Immunity Bio adenovirus based vaccine. The list is quite long. I have tried to enumerate most of the vaccines which are available and commonly used. Most of the vaccines are, like I told, are either protein based, DNA based, mRNA based. Few of them are the newer ones which are nanoparticle vaccine based. What is very important is any untoward medical event that follows immunization should be reported. The adverse event following immunization components like detection and reporting, investigation, causality assessment of adverse events, and risk or benefit assessment should be there. Finally, all said and done, how to protect ourselves? There are 9 important COVID-19 prevention measures. Stay home, self-isolate yourself, clean your hands frequently, either with soap and water or alcohol-based rub. Cover your nose and mouth whenever you're sneezing or coughing. Avoid touching unnecessarily. Maintain a minimal physical distance of at least a meter from each other. Stay away from crowds. Use a fabric mask when distancing is not possible. Use a medical or surgical mask if you may be at high risk, like high age, or if you're a medical personnel, and regularly clean and disinfect frequently touched surfaces. More importantly, vaccinate. Vaccinate yourselves, vaccinate the community, and be positive as far as vaccination goes, because all of us as physicians and case physicians will fully agree that the second wave was much better controlled, thank God, because the vaccine had arrived. Thank you.
Thank you, respected speakers. It was a wonderful discourse, and already the questions have started pouring in. So let us start one by one with the questions, which will make the topic more illuminating for all of us. Now, our first question is to Dr. Rajadhar. Once biologicals have been accepted as part of GINA or other guidelines, biologicals is something like it changes actually the natural history of the disease. So next to biologicals comes stem cell or gene therapy. What is your take on that in the near future for the control of asthma?
So thank you, Atri. Hi, Ravi. Good to see you. Not seen you for a while. Good to hear you speaking. Loved your talk. And thank you to CCI for arranging all of this and putting this all together. So congratulations to the entire CCI team for doing this. So intriguing question, Atri. So I think the concept is broader than what you've just asked. The concept is about cure of chronic diseases versus control of chronic diseases. So till date, what we do is to try and control a disease. We cannot cure. So be that hypertension, be that diabetes, be that asthma, be that COPD, our aim is to try and achieve control and maximize control so that a person can have a good quality of life in spite of having the disease. Biologics are a halfway house. Biologics are a halfway house in that they provide control and that you can reduce the medications required for control to a large extent, and you move from control towards cure of a disease in some cases. The next step forward is things like stem cell transplant, where you alter the genetic makeup of the individual in a way that you get rid of the disease in the individual. So, you know, one of the things that happened during the very eventful Barack Obama era in the US, a lot of good things happened. Most things that happened were very good. However, one of the things which took a back seat was the research on stem cells. However, with the Trump era, a lot of not so good things happened. But one good thing that happened with the Trump era was that stem cell research was restarted again. And then there is all of Scandinavia, where there's a lot of stem cell research going on. Going forward, I think for all chronic diseases, but especially for asthma, there will be the provision of cure. There will be the provision of stem cell transplant. But I think that is probably looking beyond my lifetime. You would probably see it Atri and Ravi, but probably beyond my lifetime before we can actually conceive of it in day-to-day clinical practice. I wouldn't be able to tell you great details about stem cell transplantation. It's beyond my knowledge, but I think it's something all of us will look forward to for chronic diseases in the future.
Thank you, sir. Now I move to Dr. Ravi Doshi. One thing which I noticed during Dr. Ravi's lecture was when a virus is used to cause harm or destruction, they say that the virus was doctored with. And when that same virus is introduced in a vaccine to save lives, they say that the vaccine engineered virus. Maybe we all doctors should protest against the English vocabulary regarding this use of the term doctored with and engineered with. So, Dr. Ravi Doshi, I often get this question that, dear sir, I just received Covishield, but my dearest friend of the opposite gender has received Covaxin. So can I take my second dose as Covaxin or Sputnik with him or her? So what is your take on this vaccination? One dose with one brand, second dose with another one. Dr. Ravi.
Well, Atri, all I can say is that a vaccination schedule is set to be complete when you get the first and second dose from a single make of a single brand. Why? Because Covishield and Covaxin both work on two different principles. So one is an inactivated, the other is a live virus carrier. So one set of vaccination will only be complete if you take either two Covishield or two Covaxins. Now, as there is a paucity of vaccination, this is being contemplated कि okay चलो शुरू में कोविशील्ड लगा दिया, बाद में अपन उसका बूस्टर थोड़ा डिले करके लगा दे. But up till now, cross is not allowed. Officially, it has been tested only with the Janssen and Janssen, which is a single dose vaccine. In that, they are using other companies just to act like a booster. But अभी भी इंडिया में अगर पहले कोविशील्ड लगाया हो तो आपको कोविशील्ड ही बाद में भी लगाना है.
Okay. So I
Can I add
noticed
something quickly?
Yeah, please, Dr. Raja, please.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Atri. So that's the official answer. That's what all of you should remember. But there's two interesting bits of information to add to that. So in UP, a little while ago, there is this town where about 85 people got a different brand of vaccine for their first dose and their second dose. It was a mistake. However, these 85 people have actually been followed up thereafter to see the level of protection that these people have by mixing and matching vaccines the way Atri talked about. Then there's this Oxford trial which is going on just now. I won't take names, but they are trying and increase the width of coverage by using two different brands of vaccine. One of them, of course, is the Oxford vaccine, but they're using a different brand, completely different mechanism of action, like Ravi pointed out a little while ago, as the second dose. And this is 8 weeks after receiving the first dose. Apparently, the initial interim analysis of the trial shows very good protection, at least based on antibody levels. You can argue how good are antibody levels in predicting protection. We don't know that. But this is still a question which is unanswered. As of now, what Ravi has said is the right answer, but we might have more intriguing answers as we go forward in the future.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed during this webinar, Chest Council of India and AstraZeneca both strongly support R&D, research and development. And today's webinar is very high on R&D, Dr. Raja Dhar and Dr. Ravi Doshi. So we have a resource limited, this question is for Dr. Raja Dhar. We have a resource limited setting, worst case scenario, where no inhalation possible. And I have access to this GINA guideline. So I know something about asthma. So which oral drug would I want to give as a stopgap measure until I can send the patient to somewhere better? In a stable case, in an acute case.
So Atri, you can see Ajay saying that he cannot see me. So I'm not sure why that is, Ajay. It's in the chat box. I can see myself. I'm not sure whether others can or not.
I can see you.
But I guess you can hear me. So that right. Right. So Atri, I didn't get the question. So the question is, we are a resource limited setting.
Where the inhalation is not possible.
We don't. So there is
we don't have
so
access
I
to
am
any
not sure
inhalation.
whether. Yeah, so I would argue against that. I think there would be very few parts in India today where there is no access to inhalers. So I think it's a mindset that we have. We sometimes fear that inhalation in unsupervised setup might result in dependence, it might result in side effects and so on. तो मेरे ख्याल से ऐसा कोई जगह नहीं है इंडिया में अभी जहां पे इनहेलर्स नहीं मिलते हैं. तो मेरे ख्याल से आप जो भी रिसोर्स लिमिटेड
Exactly. This should be the message that there should be no excuse for not giving inhaler to an asthma patient. Wherever you are, you must remember that the drug of choice in asthma, stable or unstable, is always inhaler. There should be absolutely no excuse for the same, for withholding it. Now, my next question to Dr. Ravi.
Atri, am I audible? Dr. N.H. Krishna here.
Yeah, Dr. N.H. Krishna, you're clearly
there are
audible.
some network issues with Rajadhar. So you please go ahead with Ravi Dosi as of now. So once he's back, you can ask his questions. So select questions only for Ravi Dosi now.
Yeah. Okay. So next question. I received this message 2 days ago from a patient of mine. Dear sir, I just got the vaccine yesterday and today happens to be my happy birthday and I want to celebrate with my friends with alcohol. So how safe it is to have alcohol after a vaccine for COVID?
Well, again, you're asking me very difficult questions, but see, alcohol is strictly a no. Ask any doctor, you're not allowed to drink anyhow. So after vaccination, officially, the word sir taught me just now, that's it. Officially, you're not supposed to drink at least for a month till the immunity sets in and antibody develops. Now, what most people do is some other story only. But actually, alcohol plays a role. It alters the immune. There is a critical possibility that the antibody response to the antigen which is injected. So you might have a poor antibody development. So officially, you are not supposed to drink till 4 weeks after vaccination.
Okay. We have a question from Dr. Tridib Chatterjee from Mumbai.
So Atri, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, Dr. Raja, we can hear you. And this
Dr.
question
Atri,
is for you.
Dr. Atri,
right.
Can I kindly interrupt here? Dr. N.H. Krishna here.
Yeah, please.
Although what all Ravi said regarding alcohol and vaccine is perfect, but please do not scare people that after vaccine, if they drink alcohol, they will develop some reactions by any case, and also that nobody comes in. Just inform them that the efficacy could be low, because this could be a major drawback in the vaccine program.
Yeah.
But after taking vaccine, unfortunately, if I drink or something, like by mistake, I had a peg or something, they shouldn't be under the confusion that they cannot do this at all. I cannot miss my peg, so I'll miss my vaccine. So please pass over this message, Ravi, to everyone. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, perfect. Actually, sir, this is actually a very, very big topic and a concern for a lot of people who are interested in alcohol, because like you very correctly told that if they want to drink, they can't take a vaccine. The message shouldn't go like that. The basic thing is, if you drink heavily or there is a lot of alcohol in the system, there is a chance that your immunity and immune response may be altered. But vaccination being a priority, I don't think that your alcoholism should be a a speed breaker to you getting vaccinated. There is no absolute contraindication. That is all I can put it.
Okay,
So
great.
let me put a slightly different spin to this. Right. Let me put a slightly different spin to this. I think it's advocated that in the post-COVID period, you should not drink for about a week. And there's good evidence to show that your chances of developing immunity in the post-COVID period with alcohol is something which is impaired, just like Ravi said. So I think getting a vaccine is a public health measure, and it's for your personal protection and the protection of your loved ones. So I think while a month is way out, don't think you don't need to drink for a month. I think for a couple of days when you've had a drink, not if you've had a vaccine, not drinking for 2 days is not such a big sacrifice. I think if you're not motivated enough not to drink for 2 days post-vaccine, then you probably are not interested in promoting public health in your country and your city and your own family. So I sort of agree that for a couple of days, no alcohol is something we should recommend post-vaccination in patients who are getting vaccinated for COVID. That's my personal opinion.
Okay, great. We have Dr. Trideep Chatterjee from Mumbai, who happens to be a very enthusiastic member of Chess Council of India. And Dr. Trideep Chatterjee has asked Dr. Raja Dhar that what should be the duration after which Montelukast can be stopped, because many patients feel very comfortable using them and develop rhinitis symptom on stopping Montelukast.
So Trideep, while he is a very enthusiastic member of CCI, he's also got the knack of asking the most difficult questions in the world. So I think the challenge is that till this FDA black box warning that I spoke about from GINA 2020, I personally used to use Montelukast for long periods of time. And I used it because I thought it was safe and effective in patients with an overlap of allergic rhinitis and asthma. And I thought continuing its use for long term did not cause many side effects. The way I have changed my practice now is to give the drug for a period of 3 months and then give the patient a drug holiday and see whether the allergic rhinitis or the asthma flares up or not. Often it doesn't. If it does, I would restart it again after 4 to 6 weeks and continue it for a period of about 3 months again. This is not based on evidence-based medicine, but this is to be in line with the FDA black box warning that I spoke about a little while ago. That would be my practice with Montelukast. But Trideep, like a lot of things, I think the evidence about how long Montelukast should be continued.
There is some technical error at Dr. Raja. He will come back. Till he comes back, I would pass on to the next question from Dr. Saurindra Banerjee, who comes from Bardhaman, West Bengal. And Dr. Saurindra is asking Dr. Ravi Doshi, what is the minimum gap of vaccine after COVID infection?
Ravi, unmute yourself.
Sorry. I will, like I presented in my presentation, the most of the research on several vaccine platforms and several newer vaccines which are coming up is a minimum of 3 weeks. Well, the reason for the same being that much time is taken for a particular antigen to go in and elicit a meaningful antibody response in the human body. So if you want to give a booster, ideally it should be after a minimum of 3 weeks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Raja has been reconnected. Yeah. Sir, to continue with Dr. Trideep's next question, this is about nasal spray. Would you prefer dual nasal spray per Montelukast versus a single-use fluticasone nasal spray?
Sorry, what was the comparison with? I got the fluticasone with
nasal spray.
What was the comparison with what?
Dual nasal spray plus Montelukast versus single
So
fluticasone
nasal spray
nasal.
plus Montelukast versus, okay, so nasal spray plus Montelukast versus nasal alone. That's the question, right? So
Yeah.
I think I would prefer starting off with an intranasal steroid and Montelukast. I would keep the nasal spray on for longer to maintain control of allergic rhinitis the way I would control asthma with an inhaled corticosteroid. And I would stop the Montelukast once good control has been achieved about 3 months down the line.
Wonderful. One thing I have always noticed whenever we are doing these programs on asthma, every time there is something new, although it is the same guideline, every time we learn something new, although it is those same pages of paper. Now, Dr. Ravi Doshi sir, another question which people all over India are asking, how efficacious are vaccine alone to prevent COVID?
Well, I would say that is a very relevant question because like the disclaimer, very famous disclaimer which Krishna sir has proposed, that what we are presenting just now in the webinar might be outdated by the time we finish the webinar. So see, vaccines are a very promising agent to induce antibodies, neutralizing antibodies, and they offer a big hope. But the majority of the population is not infected, and they getting vaccinated are effectively able to not get infected. So what I simply want to say is vaccines are very promising in itself, and if a large percentage of our population is vaccinated, I think we may effectively ward off COVID-19 as a community threat. But individual cases might keep on happening. We can't say that vaccine will offer 100% protection, but at the same time, at least the severity is significantly coming down. Like in the presentation, it was told the efficacy of all major vaccines: Oxford vaccine, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson and Johnson, Covaxin, Sputnik. Against severe cases, they are 100% efficacious. Against mild to moderate cases, they have relatively lower efficacy of around, let's say, 70 to 80%. So one advantage with vaccination is, at least if you develop a severe infection, you will not die. There will be very reduced mortality. But mild to moderate cases will keep on happening. We will be better equipped in handling them.
Wonderful. Let me share a small anecdote. 10 years ago, I had just entered a student of pulmonary medicine, and it was my first opportunity by a academic hosted by AstraZeneca when I could actually hear Dr. Rajadhar. It was about inhalers and inhalation devices. And after 10 years, it's my opportunity to host him in a talk as a moderator. So whenever we are talking about these inhalers, you have this young adult personality and you have this senior citizen retired personality. What would be your inhaler device for these two kind of patients?
So, lovely question, Atri. I just wanted to quote what Krishna Bhai has just said in the chat box. So I think good analogy that if you are driving, if you're driving your scooter or your bike and you've got a helmet on, it doesn't mean that you go and bang your helmet against the bus which is in front of you. So I think that's an important analogy, what he means. And I loved, Ravi, your answer. I really loved the answer. But an important message is that even when you've taken the vaccine, please practice all the measures that Ravi spoke about at the end of his talk. He nicely elucidated about the sanitization, masking, and social distancing. That remains, because you never know whether you're going to be in that unlucky 10 to 20% of people where the vaccine is not going to prevent you from getting the infection again or getting the infection for the first time. So very important point. And I like your analogy, Krishna Bhai. So wonderful. So coming back to your question, Atri, I think there are two aspects to choice of an inhaler. The first is what is good for the person, and the person puts their hand up and says, this is the device that I like the best and I want to use. Unfortunately, a lot of our physicians, including myself, have their own biases. We like certain inhalers more than we like others. So it's a balance between these two, the doctor's bias versus the patient's choice. So we often give patient choices. So for a youngster, for someone who is technology savvy, who's running around, you want to give them an inhaler, which is easy to carry, easy to fit into their pocket, and they will normally manage to synchronize taking the inhaler easily. And this would amount to normally using a DPI in people who are young, right? So you could use any fancy devices that are available. For an elderly person, where there are restrictions in how do you manipulate your fingers, how you coordinate your breathing, etc., it becomes more of a challenge. The more greater challenge is using a DPI, being able to develop the capacity and breath hold that you would need with a dry powder inhaler, and often an MDI with a spacer becomes easier for these individuals. However, this is not the same fitting for all. I think you will have certain elderly people, people who would love to have a dry powder inhaler, where some youngsters who would want to have MDI with a spacer. And I think some amount of choice has to be given to the patient in case the patient wants a choice. The last thing is a breath actuated device, which I absolutely love. I think the breath actuated device lies somewhere in between MDI and a DPI. And I love the breath actuated device that Cipla has come in. I prescribe the SynchroBreathe quite a lot. And I think devices like these are useful. Along with that, I think devices like the Turbohaler is a great device. It helps breathing easily. And again, for youngsters, the Turbohaler is a device that I've often used because it's good to look at. It's easy to use. It's tasteless. And again, a Turbohaler is a device that I would often use in my patients, youngsters with asthma.
Yeah, I would also add that I initially started this Turbohaler for these NRI people. Ranchi has a lot of these NRI people who come home to their parents. And since medicine consult is cheaper in India, they consult here. And I started Turbohaler because it is available abroad also. But when I actually saw it being used, its convenience, I also moved on to these breath actuated devices more than the conventional MDI and DPI. But yes, every student of pulmonary medicine must know what are the devices and always give the patient a choice. One device may not be strictly for a certain age group. It is always ultimately upon the patient's comfort level. Now, we have this question from Dr. Ajay Lanjewar for Dr. Ravi Doshi. Is there any recommendation for 3 to 9 months gap of second dose of vaccine if a patient has received the first dose before getting infected? Dr. Ravi, sir.
The latest recommendation by Government of India for post-COVID vaccination is a gap of 3 months. But again, that is prone to the fact that there is a lot of paucity of vaccination. They have also added in rider very recently. If you have to go to foreign, you can get it done in 28 days also. So what the Oxford trial, which sir told, the original Oxford trial, that was a gap of I think 4 weeks. The 4 weeks was the official period which is mentioned in the trial for Covishield, and for Covaxin it is arranged
6 weeks.
6 weeks. So that is what is official. Rest everything is more of convenience marketing going on.
Yeah. So one thing is there what the scientists say, but another thing we must remember is what the logistics people say. The world's largest vaccination drive is going on. And sometimes we have to depend upon logistics, local guidelines, local restrictions also. So we must remember that in our local scenario, that what is the local official statement. Now, one question for Dr. Raja. In asthma and pregnancy, we all remember that 1/3 rule, 1/3 worsen, 1/3 unchanged, 1/3 improve. Nowadays, any guideline will keep into account COVID and post-COVID status. So is there any statement yet regarding an asthma patient developing COVID, that how many percent may worsen, how many percent may be unchanged, or how many percent may improve asthma control? Or your experience regarding the same?
So that's a fantastic question, Atri. I am amazed. I mean, if you thought of that question, that's a very good question. But like most very good questions, I don't have an answer. I think that we don't have enough data about pregnant women and COVID to say how much would result in improvement of asthma, how much would lead to worsening, and so on. However, your question is important because there's something that we know about asthma. We know that asthma and the inhaled corticosteroid that we use in asthma results in either COVID-19 infections, or even if you get COVID-19 infection, the severity of the infection would be lesser. So I think the same factor would translate into the pregnant state. So if you are taking your inhaler properly, A, your chances during pregnancy of getting COVID-19 would be lesser because you've got background asthma. And B, if you've used your inhaled corticosteroid regularly the way your doctor has told you to, your chances of having a severe disease or getting the disease in the first place is going to be lesser. But I don't know what happens to the 1/3 rule as yet, but it's an interesting question and I'll think about it and read about it, Atri. So thank you for asking it.
Yeah. Dr. Trideep Chatterjee is basically have lots of these immune patients or rheumatology patients. So he wants to ask Dr. Ravi Doshi that all of his patients are on methotrexate, immunosuppressant, high-dose steroid. What duration should he taper this immunosuppressant before giving them the vaccine for COVID? Dr. Ravi.
Well, again, see, this is just like the use of HCQ and steroids, which we did initially in COVID. See, sir, all I can say that is officially nothing has been mentioned regarding this in either of the vaccines which I have gone through. Maybe I would like to pass it on to Rajadhar, sir. Maybe you can answer it, sir. I don't have a problem.
So I'll tell you, Ravi, you're right. So I think this is again, so there are two parts to it. So Trideep, the first part is what happens if you are on an immunosuppressive and you get COVID. That's the first part, right? Which you have not asked because it's not within the ambit of the discussion today. But if you have COVID and if you're on an immunosuppressive, you would want to reduce the dose of the immunosuppressive as far as possible, right? If you are on oral steroids and if you get COVID, you would want to reduce the dose of the oral corticosteroid as much as possible to maintain the baseline disease as much under control as possible. So that's what we know about COVID-19 and immunosuppressives. Now, if you want to extrapolate that to actually getting the vaccine, I would suggest that for the peri-vaccine period, so maybe a week before, you try and use the same analogy in reducing the dose of the steroid and reducing the dose of the immunosuppressive to as low a dose as is feasible, give the vaccine, and then go back to your normal dose, maybe a week after getting the vaccine. That's would be my analogy. It's not based on science. If you look at, there's a BTS guidance on vaccination in COVID, and it says something of a similar nature. But I don't think this trial evidence data, but this is what I use in my practice. And my evidence is the BTS guideline, which is available on. So if you Google BTS COVID vaccination guidance, you would get to this.
Lord Krishna has asked one question to both the speakers. And what he wants to ask is that why the world is telling that the world's largest vaccination drive is going on in India, where to the best of our knowledge, China has a larger population than India. What may be the reason for this?
We are very open-ended, so it's all open data, open for everybody to see. I don't think that's there in China.
So I'll answer the questions, Krishna Bhai. I think I think the problem, like Ravi says very gently, I'll put it a bit more brutally. I think what happens in China stays in China. What happens in India does not stay in India, it travels throughout the world. So we don't know what's happening in China. We don't even know how many COVID-19 cases there are in India, in China, let alone the amount of vaccination. So less said better about China. I think we'll spend an entire meeting talking about China in the not so distant future. So I think we don't know about China as the answer. We know that we are running the biggest vaccination drive in the world for sure.
Okay. We have Dr. Saurindra Banerjee again. He wants to ask that how many asthma cases was severely affected by COVID, your local experience, both the speakers, that are known asthma developing severe COVID, both the speakers.
You want to have a go first, Ravi? You want to answer that first and then I'll take it after?
Sure, sir. Personally speaking, I would say every week for the past 1.5 years, at least 1 or 2 cases of asthma, not too many, but they were there. It's not like COPD or things like that, which never we could see also. But asthmatics very well were there in the COVID population.
Let me give you some food for thought. And this is food for thought for everyone who's listening in today. So I think when an asthmatic gets COVID and the numbers are lesser, as Ravi said, it's not as many as a non-asthmatic getting COVID, you can actually get affected in 2 ways. You can actually have the parenchymal disease with the ground glass opacities, the consolidation, etc. that you get, or you can actually get an acute exacerbation of asthma, which has been triggered by COVID-19. And these are not the same. So for instance, like pollen or other respiratory viruses can act as a trigger. COVID-19 can cause no parenchymal change, but just cause bronchospasm and hence an exacerbation of COVID-19. The numbers of these patients are not very small. They're actually significant. And COVID-19 without causing parenchymal change can cause bronchospasm and airways exacerbation in patients with asthma. The other category, which is having asthma, but then having COVID-19, which is more of the parenchymal, where you score the CT and the score comes back as being an 8 or a 9 or a 10, in my experience is a very small number. It's not even half as much as you would get in the non-asthmatic population. The patients who have an airways exacerbation, I would treat as an airways exacerbation. The patients who have parenchymal changes, the CT changes, the scoring that we do with ground glass opacities, they are more difficult. The severity is greater in these people. And there is some amount of mortality in these patients who have parenchymal change with the background of asthma.
So one thing, how I can simplify what Dr. Ravi and Dr. Raja said is, no one can predict who will get COVID. No one can predict who will get severe COVID. No one can predict who will not survive from COVID, whatever may be the comorbidities. But yes, the explained physiology that inhaled steroids are actually being used is definitely having a statistically better chance of being protected from someone who may not be regularly use that inhaled steroid. But at the end of the day, there is no rule of the thumb. Same goes for vaccination also, that someone, despite the best efforts, may be in that unfortunate 5 to 10% who did not make it, rather than the 80 to 85%, which is the majority. And often, due to media, biased media, that unfortunate case may get more highlight compared to the majority who are actually making it with the help of all our healthcare professionals. Now, one question. Post-COVID, bronchospasm is being faced many of us. Many people are coming with post-COVID bronchospasm. Can it be a relapse of a childhood asthma, or should we take it just as a transient bronchospasm? Both speakers, please.
I think sir answered it in the last question only. Basically, the tracheobronchial exacerbation caused by COVID virus, that might be the answer to this question which they're asking. That there is a significant amount of cases which have tracheobronchial exacerbation, and that is where inhaled corticosteroids have a role even post-COVID.
in the slide on vaccines.
Sorry, Atri, I couldn't hear for a minute. That's why I spoke. Don't worry. Please go on.
Yeah, sure. In the slide on vaccines engineered by viruses, what is the possibility of someone getting another infection probably due to this vaccination? We are not talking about COVID after a COVID vaccine. We are talking about any other infection after a COVID vaccine.
Well, most of the vaccines which are being used as delivery agents, they are using inactivated viruses or attenuated viruses. Up till now, the commonly reported infections or syndromes with Oxford vaccine, they noted a few viral cases of Guillain-Barré. With Moderna, Pfizer, and Janssen, they reported a few cases of thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome. Up till now, non-COVID infections caused due to vaccinations have not been officially reported by any of the vaccine platforms.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Has Dr. Raja joined? Yeah, Dr. Raja has definitely joined. So, what we were talking about in the GINA update, that very soon the GINA update will also contain COVID and post-COVID data. When we treat a case of COVID, severe COVID, we want or we don't want lots of immunomodulators come into play. Immunomodulators are there, molecules are there. So once this lucky patient escapes, comes back, and this patient is an asthmatic who has received some wonderful immunomodulators during the storm. Now, will there be any significant change in the treatment of his asthma after survival? Both speakers, please.
So I'll give you a short answer first, Atri. So I don't think the immunomodulators that you have during COVID will have a long-standing impact on the asthma. I think you would treat the asthma like you were doing before, based on symptoms, based on exacerbations, and based on lung function in the post-COVID period. There was a question in the question box, which I saw a little while ago, about duration of inhaled steroids in the post-COVID period. So I think the thought process was more about the use of inhaled steroid as in budesonide in the COVID period. It's not the post-COVID period for which we have data. It's about acute COVID infection. And there, inhaled budesonide in a dose of 1600 micrograms in a day has been advocated for a period of 2 weeks. And it does two different things. First, it reduces the number of emergency visits and hospitalizations in patients with acute COVID early on in the disease process. And second, it reduces the total duration of the disease. This is based on STOIC and principal studies which have been published from Oxford. There's no data about post-COVID and the use of inhalers. However, what Ravi said a little while ago, I think is perfect. If you have airways disease, you would treat the airways disease the way you would treat someone with asthma till you manage to control the symptoms. So I think that's the message about use in the post-COVID period.
Dr. Ravi, you have been very famous all over India. In fact, you were reported by Pan-India media for treating one of the worst COVID cases during the first wave. So your experience on these asthma patients after they survive those severe COVID?
Well, I'm not so trial savvy, but I do have I have an observation to make that people have a lot to say about post-COVID effects of a lot of drugs which are being used, be it remdesivir, be it a lot of anti-inflammatory post-effects. But the fact of the matter is all of these agents have a very short time span. Their mechanism permits them to act only for 24 hours or 48 hours. So whatever you do, be it the steroid that you give or anti-inflammatory that you give, has a very short-lived advantage, like Sir says. So post-COVID means ideally after that 2-week period, I hardly see that they will have any residual benefit to offer. Yes, but like post-COVID symptoms like coughing, some amount of bronchitis, which continues. So we need to continue inhaled steroids more in a few subset of these patients, not in all. That's all my observation is in these
Okay,
patients.
thank you. Today, we are fortunate that our founder chairperson, Dr. N.H. Krishna from Davangere, has spared some time from his schedule to join us, and I would invite him for a message. Dr. N.H. Krishna, you are on.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. N.H. Krishna, the founder, chairman, trustee from Davangere of Chess Council of India. So actually, I'll tell you initially, fantastic, absolutely brilliant. Raja is always Sachin Tendulkar, so nothing to talk about that. He bats the way Tendulkar does always. And you were nowhere less, Dosi. You were accompanying Tendulkar as Virat Kohli at the other end. And this Rishabh Pant, who has recently evolved now, Atri, is making wonders. Now, actually, I came live to deliver a very important message, which we failed delivering any time to the entire mankind. I think nobody did this job in the entire globe. They call doctors as God. And they expect doctors will do anything and save the patient like God. I'm telling you, do not call us gods. We are also human. Do not blame the doctor because, as Atri rightly told, you do not know, you cannot give it a forethought. Who will become critical, who will die, who will not. Comorbidity is an issue, isn't an issue everywhere. Remember, very perfect statement from my end. The God, so-called God, the creator himself is not perfect. Had he himself been perfect, there wouldn't have been births with congenital anomalies. There wouldn't have been births with congenital anomalies. कोई बच्चा पैदा होता है जिसका हाथ नहीं होता है, जिसका पैर नहीं होता है. So God himself is not perfect. So do not blame doctors. Do not go rash with the doctors. Do not become anguish with the doctors. Doctors are doing the best they can do, being human. When the God himself is not perfect, do not expect any doctor that the moment he touches you, it is his basic duty to send you back alive. So this is my message. Go on. Atri, you can have the further words and kindly take a take-home message from Raja Bhai and Dosi Bhai. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. We have this last question, Dr. Trideep again. COVID patient with lot of cough. What may be the role of a LAMA, long-acting anti-muscarinic? COVID patient with lot of cough.
Sure.
Anyone, speaker.
Yeah, so I'll answer that quickly. So Trideep, to the best of my knowledge, the best treatment would still be an inhaled corticosteroid. The cough in these individuals is mainly due to airway inflammation. Bronchoconstriction is a feature, but the bronchoconstriction is more related to inflammation rather than smooth muscle narrowing. Hence, my first line treatment would remain an ICS. If I was worried about ongoing bronchoconstriction, I would give them maybe an ICS and a LABA, and then think of adding in a LAMA later on in case the bronchospasm did not go with the ICS and the LABA. So ICS first, ICS LABA next, and then a LAMA. I don't think there's an added benefit of a LAMA in patients with post-viral bronchospasm. If that's your question, I don't think there's any evidence for that. But I would treat them like you would use the step care management in GINA that we spoke about, or I spoke about during my talk. I would add in the LAMA last in patients with asthma.
Okay. I would request Dr. Raja to please give your concluding remarks.
So my concluding remarks, so in line with what Krishna Bhai said, I would like to say that we are here to do a job. It's our job to look after you. It's our job to look after COVID-19. But like everyone else, we also have families. We also have our inherent insecurities and our fears. So if you make us gods, you would be expecting something which we cannot deliver. We'll never be able to deliver. Whenever you call us God, you ask us for powers which is beyond us. So like Krishna Bhai said, please don't do that. We will try our best, but that's all we can do. That's one. The second thing I wanted to say sort of from my talk is, when you now prescribe an inhaler for your patient with asthma, whatever grade of severity, please make sure that the patient is also getting a steroid along with whatever he's inhaling. So every puff of inhaler that goes in should have a puff of inhaled corticosteroid in it. You will prevent progression of the asthma. You will prevent airway remodeling, and you will prevent exacerbations of asthma by doing that. So that's one strong carry home message. If there's one thing that you remember from my talk for Gina, that's
Okay. Dr. Ravi, sir, your take-home message today.
This COVID era never teaches us to be ruthlessly offensive, but rather optimistically defensive. We all should be optimistic about all the defense, all the vaccines which are coming in. And the best way to prevent the third wave from coming is that each and every one of us gets ourselves, our families, and all people known to you motivated enough and bring them to the vaccination center. Go ahead, get each and every person get vaccinated. The third wave won't come on.
If I want to sum up the last 1.5 hours, first thing, motivate people to get vaccinated. If you got vaccinated, post a pic on social media, post a video of yours telling about your vaccination experience. Secondly, asthma cannot be without inhalers. So learn what are the inhalers, learn what are the inhalation devices, be aware of all of them to beat asthma at the best possible level. I would want to thank both the speakers, Dr. Rajadhar, Dr. Ravi Doshi. Tremendous workload, second wave, post-COVID, whatnot, but yet you gave time to tell us so many up-to-date things. You actually read up and did R&D at such a difficult time to tell us something so important. My gratitude to both the speakers. Our CCI founder chairperson, Dr. N.H. Krishna, Dr. Narayana Pradeep, who is always there, the planning, inception, all the support behind the scenes. Our CCI president Dr. Narendra sir, for always encouraging us. And the webinar coordinator, Dr. Vijay Kumar Chennamchetty. If he does not work for 15 minutes, the South Indian film industry can destabilize because they are all his patients. But yet he considered our CCI webinar before his South Indian film industry, and he gives his first time for all of us so that these webinars can continue smoothly. Over the last 1.5 years, the country may have been locked down, but knowledge could not be locked down, and even the new knowledge could be shared on a national platform. Special thanks to anyone who were behind the technical team and our academic partner for this webinar, AstraZeneca. You guys did a fantastic job. So this is good night from Chest Council of India to all of you. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Atri, also. Excellent moderation.
Excellent moderation, Atri.
Thank you, sir.
Well done.
Thank you, sir. Chalo, Atri, good night.
Good night. Good night.